Hey, what's up? I'm Guy.
I'm John.
This is our YouTube channel. Subscribe and give this video a like.
Also, check out the podcast below in the description.
Also, we got a video right there. That's our first George Kittle video that we talked about what we estimated his contract would and should be, right? It was like a combination of what we think it would fairly be given the circumstances. And I went back and watched it, John. Spoiler alert. We did a 1, 2, 3 guess. You said $29 million total value, guaranteed dollars, not total. I said $34 million at the time.
Yeah, and after some of the news this week, right, it feels, I don't know, 50 might be the starting point of the conversation.
Yeah, I mean the question is, did it change? So, Michael Silver goes on NFL Network, the company he works for. It says he talked to the agent for George Kittle, Jack Becta, and Silver said they have a ways to go in terms of figuring out his value. Quote, they're not close at all. Jack Becta, the agent, said, I don't care about the tight end market. I'm being paid to do a George Kittle deal.
He's not wrong.
He's not wrong.
He's not wrong.
He's not
wrong at all. And we said it at the combine when we talked to Albert Breer, and the big news, I guess the news came out probably a couple weeks later when Austin Hooper, the number one tight end in the class, turns out he's now the highest paid tight end in NFL history. And we're like, $22 million total and guaranteed. To put it into context, Amari Cooper, who George Kittle, every single person in the world would take George Kittle over Amari Cooper. Now, I understand they play different positions, but got $60 million guaranteed in a 5-year, $100 million deal. And when we saw that happen and the Austin Hooper money, we just acknowledged it was going to be a really difficult situation for a team that the Niners are. They don't let good players walk. Not that they draft, historically. Look at the last 20 years of when they draft a good player who is a all-pro, Pro Bowl level guy, they pay him. But it's a little easier when you pay Patrick Willis or Navarro Bowman or, Joe Staley or Frank Gore or Vernon Davis over the periods. Like, you just do comps relative to their position and you pay kind of early. Well, I think they want to pay George Kittle right now, and he's looking at them going, you're offering me a 4-year deal worth, let's say, I don't know, $60 million and $30 million guaranteed. Like, you can take it and shove it. And you'd be like, well, it's the highest paid deal in the history of the league at tight end. I don't give a shit because I have nothing in common with any of those guys. You'd be like, yeah, while I do have something in common with like Kelsey and Gronk, I just counter and say those are two of the most underpaid players in the history of professional football relative, because really what makes them so special, now Kittle is a great blocker, and the run game is a huge part of what the Niners do. And we all acknowledge he's the best blocking tight. He's a fucking hammer. But he is so good catching the football after the catch. He's a dominant player with the football in his hands. And he goes, listen, I see what the wide receivers are paid. Even if I'm not going to end up getting them, I don't even ever mention Austin Hooper's name.
Right. Yeah. I said this at the time, and
Austin Hooper's a good player.
But he's not in George Kittle's category is the superstars of the NFL, the faces of the league. That's his category, right? And
he is. Would you say he's a face of the league? Obviously,
yes.
of the Niners, but of the league right now.
Yes, I would.
I agree.
He's one of the best players in the NFL / one of the faces of the league, right? Being one of the best players doesn't make you one of the faces of the league.
Because of his personality and just how much everyone loves him.
Totally, yep. And he's on one of the best teams, just the whole thing. Now, it's almost dumb to talk about contracts and ignore precedent because precedent is so much a part of this. But just for a moment, and I said this last time, so I won't spend too much time on it, but like if the 49ers in a sport where it was just, here's your best players, you just distribute this money however you do it, doesn't matter what Austin Hooper got paid. And they said, you're about to give somebody a 5-year, $87 million contract with $40 to $50 million guaranteed. Would you rather give that money to Eric Armstead or to George Kittle? Who would they give that money to?
Yeah, George Kittle.
Right, but that's the money that Eric Armstead just got that contract with $40 million guaranteed, $85 million overall, right? And so
it's easier though for him to argue, the defensive lineman gets paid so much money.
Yeah, but now you bring into just what the market pays, precedent, other positional comps, like that's how you end up here. And George Kittle's point is what you just said. Jack Becta's point is, and even Silver kind of said this, yeah, I catch the football like a tight end and I play that position. I wear the number. I wear 85, so yeah, I'm a tight end. But I catch the football better than Amari Cooper. I block like a left tackle. That stat that Silver had, that outside runs with Kittle on the field were
Almost 2 yards extra.
yeah, it was actually more. It was 5.6 to 3.3. 5.6. This was going into the Super Bowl. So it's like I don't exist. So I'm a unicorn, and I'm getting punished for being a unicorn.
Think how many first downs that equals when you add 2.3 extra yards to a run to his side over the course of a season.
Now I'm throwing on first down instead of running on third down or throwing on third down. But here, so we've talked about the money, and the money based on history doesn't change today. I think part of this video is like, okay, so if Jack Becht is going to do a George Kittle deal, that's not going to happen by just sitting at the table with the Niners and hammering it out.
Well, do you think it's a possibility right now if you're the Niners? Would this make sense? Austin Hooper was making like $12 or $13 million a year. But to me, the yearly average means nothing because he got 22 guaranteed. So it's like a season and a half contract. Right? They're not tied to him for long.
Yeah. It's basically $11 million for 2 years each year.
If the Niners looked at George Kittle and said, we'll give you a 4-year deal, and you're still young, like you could look at it, well, if you're still playing well like a Gronk, you get a third contract. $60 million, 15 a year, and $40 million guaranteed. So essentially, give or take, 3-year guaranteed contract. Do you think that would be too much for him to sign? Or, I mean, would be enough for him to go, it's not worth the headache of holding out or going through these. That's a very, flies by, almost doubles Austin Hooper's. I'm the highest paid yearly average by several million. That would to me be like, but that might be the low point to start and not get hung up on, right?
Just to
would that be the number?
How much guaranteed?
$40 million.
So if
my
first reaction is that he would be more likely to take that than the Niners would be to offer it. But I love the idea of a shorter contract with a bigger guarantee. If you're them, you go, you're not getting tied to a guy who does play really like in a physical way. And you're not totally blowing up the market, although you're blowing up the market, but you're not paying him like a top-end wide receiver.
Do you think it's a risky move to do an unprecedented contract, even though it's kind of a unicorn position that doesn't cost that much, right? Because if Kittle was a wide receiver or a pass rusher, we'd be talking like Khalil Mack, Aaron Donald, the elite money, whoever the best left tackle, Tyron Smith a couple years ago, Fletcher Cox, whatever his position was, we'd be like, yeah, he's going to get top of the market. So still it's lower. But you got to wonder if they do set precedent with my idea, which I doubt they would, then is Bosa licking his lips? What if Fred Warner has another, a Pro Bowl type season and goes, well, it's time for me, right? And some of these guys coming up the pipe, Trent Williams, who they have now.
The argument, the counter for the Niners to those guys would be, Nick, your position already is paid at a premium, and Nick Bosa is gonna get paid like he might get, by the time his contract comes, he might be the number one paid defensive end in the league, right?
But that's what I'm saying. He'll just want that number, which is going to be astronomical, right?
But is his production
his starting point?
Going to be
I see
the pad between Hooper and Kittle is like humongous.
Yes. Not even
the
same
risk
sentence.
would be like if you had a second Kittle, who's like 3 years younger. You're like, oh God, now we're gonna have to pay. That would be a reason to keep the money down.
The risk would be also is if, like, let's just say hypothetically, Debo becomes like the next Michael Thomas and has a couple back-to-back years of like 90 catches and just balls, like just wants huge money relative to like Amari Cooper.
You're saying
these
the risk
are just
is
the things
that,
you talk about.
Yeah.
Another position. You're right. Those relative to the position. That's where the tight end is a unicorn, where you want to be the team and not be the actual player, because it sucks when you get really good. And it's why we've kind of broached the topic time and time again. And we don't feel that I'll be shocked if he does it. But the move is, if you really want to get to that 40 to 50 probably range, you can't show up when training camp starts.
Albert Breer was on this podcast. You caught him at the combine. And he said, look, these deals don't get done in these situations. Resetting the market doesn't get done in these situations without a holdout, usually.
It's happened 3 times in the last 18 months. All 3 holdouts. Ezekiel Elliott, Aaron Donald, Khalil Mack ultimately forced to trade,
Yeah.
but got what he wanted,
Yeah.
right?
So
They held out.
the question is, where's the line for the Niners between how much are you willing to reset the market, and how close is that to Kittle's number? Like, is Kittle going, I'm holding out, I need $45 million, and the Niners are going, dude, we'll give you $33 million. Is that close enough for Kittle to not hold out? Like, is he like, I don't want to hold out, give me 35, and probably not.
To me,
if they're
part
that
of the
far apart.
win for Zeke, Donald, and Khalil was when they showed back up. It was like cha-ching.
Right.
And I don't know if because Guy, if they signed him for let's say $33 million and let's say it was 4 years, 60 million, 15 a year, so it looks good. They'll be like highest yearly average by millions, but they're like 29.7 guaranteed. We'd go, God, that's a big win for the Niners. He gets a major injury. They can get out. They're not stuck for long. That's where, to me, if you're Kittle, and this is the shitty part about being an NFL player relative to the NBA and baseball, where they just kind of get the huge money when you're this level of player. That even we've seen it with Mack and Donald, who play a more important position. I wouldn't say they're more important to like their teams than Kittle is to theirs, but the way the league values, I get Hall of Fame defensive linemen. They got juice. But they held out for historic money. I wonder if it'd be quote unquote historic, but would it go like, woo, damn, that's still a pretty good deal for the Niners.
Yeah.
Would he have to miss games?
I don't know, because every game is going to be so critical for them. Are they willing to go there? I mean, just missing camp at this point would be pretty significant, right? Now the other part of that deal you just mentioned, right? Let's say a $60 million deal with $30 million guaranteed, so it's basically 2 for 15. If he plays at a George Kittle level for those 2 years, then year 3 is that when the holdout comes? Like, it's time to renegotiate this contract. I need a new deal. I don't know.
Yeah, to me it would then depend on who else has been paid since. Like he's still there's
still be the highest
very
paid
strong chance he'd be the highest paid guy. To me, he could easily operate like a quarterback if he signed a deal like that. When we just look back, he played all 4 years. I just think this was Mack. This was Donald's argument. Zeke definitely a lot like Kittle. We play very violent positions. Kirk Cousins is more when the dust settles in 5 years and Cousins retires, and you go, he made $240 million because he probably never gets hurt. Where at any moment, guy, we saw last year Kittle got hurt. He's a violent player. He plays against violent positions and defensive ends. He looks to run over linebackers and safeties. If I tell you in the next 4 years, let's say Kittle goes on to have a Hall of Fame career, he's going to miss games over that period of time. And there are going to be moments where you, I, and everyone watching this right now are sitting on the couch where you go, get up, George. Get up, George. It's inevitable, guy, the way he plays. Because I think his comp is Gronk, and Gronk, till the day his career unofficially ended, now he's back, had a moment I felt every couple times a season when you go, oh my God, is Gronk's leg going to fall off? Or, oh my God, is he dead? And part of it is just these huge collisions when you're that big. Kittle's not quite as tall, but he's faster. Like by the end, Gronk wasn't moving as fast. George runs so fucking fast that some of the collisions he has, even with like a nickel corner, you're like, God, that's a car wreck. And I think that's where I struggle if I'm the Niners going, well, listen, we love him. I'd gladly give him Amari's contract if in a vacuum.
If we had to, but we don't have to. And the Niners don't do things they don't have to do from a contractual standpoint. They don't.
And that's not great business, right? With a position that gets hurt a lot when you don't have to.
The teams that are pretty good with their money, generally the teams that are pretty good over long periods of time don't do things they don't have to do. Like George, yeah, I would love to give you the richest contract in the league, but it's not how it works.
Of all the holdouts of the major players we've mentioned, I even don't think Zeke's was that complicated. It was like Jerry's going to crack. They love him. He is the offense. He kind of carries them. The D linemen were going to get paid in some form or fashion. This to me feels like the most complicated holdout. It's not a holdout yet, but just contractual at odds of two sides that have like factual data against and for on both sides that I don't necessarily know where this goes. I think we would both agree the Niners would ideally love to avoid any contentious situation with this individual.
No question. And
right?
I don't know that a holdout has to be contentious, but they like to avoid that. I'd be surprised, even if there's a holdout, I'd be surprised if it got quote unquote contentious. I think they do such a good job of making sure they're not saying the wrong things or sending the wrong messages about their players.
Yeah, I don't think a holdout necessarily is contentious, but when a guy's just not there, it becomes a huge story at this guy's magnitude.
Thing, right? Is like when you talk about Zeke, for example, or Khalil Mack, you're talking about top 5 picks. George Kittle's a 5th round pick. Does that change what he's willing to sign based on just he hasn't made as much money as those guys have to this point?
I think if you're the Niners, you view that to work in your favor when you throw out a $34 million guaranteed number or something that just dwarfs by $12 million the next highest paid. You go, listen, man, which is unfair. You go, well, it's not my fault, that I've been making no money. It's kind of Dak's argument. It was Russell Wilson's argument once upon a time. Remember, his first contract got kind of ugly because you all go, well, look at the cost basis. Factor me in, even give me $50 million for 4 more years and factor in the 7 years your guys are stealing. Like, that's where Zeke and Mac and Donald, they've made so much money. That Clowney right now is sitting out. Well, he's made $50 million. He can kind of wait and pick and choose.
He's got a soft.
George got a huge raise. Got a huge raise going into the season to a little over $2 million because of all of his incentives and how good he's been.
I'll say this too. This is not a year I'd want to have anybody holding out. Coming out of the lockout in 2011, there were a disproportionate amount. I don't want to go dark here, John, but there was a disproportionate amount of Achilles injuries coming out of the lockout relative to how many injuries there usually are to start a season. And so I think the whole league is at risk. Like, we could do another video on this. I think somebody's season is going to get flipped upside down just because players are not going to have as much prep time. And the last thing I'd want is the limited prep time being cut even further because of a holdout. That's not being on a side. I would be terrified of holdouts if I were a team or a player.
Well, I think a big part of I listened to this Joe Rogan Kevin Hart interview, and he talked about his back injury. Kevin Hart was a big lifter, workout guy, and he thought, and the doctors even told him, he's like, I never lifted. I mean, some of it was vanity, but some of it was just I felt better. And when I got in the car accident, because I had been such an active guy in the weight room, and this was an accident, it probably saved, and the doctors even told him that you would have been paralyzed. I mean, it just could have been a simple 1 inch here, 1 inch there, but maybe a muscle. And I think a lot of times with the athletes, whenever a normal human goes, yeah, I think my entire leg would have shattered right there. It happens a lot in football, right? And in the NBA. These guys are such freaks. But a huge part of it in the sport of football is the intense lifting in the off season to build up then the summer where they train, and then even in training camp to maintain this huge base. Now, I think George is unique. He's been taking videos of his home workouts, but that's not like these NFL teams. There's a reason they pay their strength coach. Some of them might make 7 figures, huge amount of money to go through this huge amount of things, all that are really intense. They feed them. It's just a huge prep for the fall where these guys, I would imagine the majority of the league, and George Kittle would fall into this category, is doing everything humanly possible, exactly what they would be doing if they would have been at their OTAs right now. Is it fair to say, though, it's not the same when you're just training with your guys and the intensity, and then immediately you got John Lynch is like, we got a bunch of smoothies for everyone. It just, everything's right there for you. That was kind of a Chip Kelly shot, but not really, because you got to need smoothies after you work out. But my point is that you just wonder, it's difficult for these guys. They're creatures of habit. And right now, even though so many of them are so locked in on that, right, they're working out as hard as humanly possible, given their access to gyms or whatever. It's just going to be difficult to be where, even if you've done everything possible, you might only be like 85, where normally you'd be at 100 going into fall camp.
Maybe there's less rest and recovery between. There's less hitting. It already isn't that much hitting. So your body, just that part of your body that gets built up. Yeah.
Especially for physical guys, right? I mean, guys are just going to hit every play, and he's one of them.
But we're just covering all our bases there. This is the
guy went down the dark rabbit hole there. No,
we'll stop it there. Let us know what you think about how this is playing out in the comments below.